tyFlow basics, making a tyFlow marble run. Have fun. Good day everybody. Let's try and look at a marble run. I've had a few requests for it on my YouTube channel. This isn't going to be quick. There's no way to explain all of this quick, but I'll do my best. So what we're looking at here is a total new little section I just recently made. I suppose the biggest trick with anything physics and something like this marble run is coming up with new track designs and new gadgets. Like this switcher you can see right here is definitely a new gadget. But let's not get diverted, and we'll make some tracks in this video, but it's going to be a multi-part tutorial series on making a marble run. And one thing I can tell you for sure is that physics doesn't necessarily always behave the way you want it to behave, or the way that you might think it should behave naturally. Like if this was 16 marbles in the real world, they probably wouldn't get jammed at the entry point, and they just somehow do with tyFlow. And unless I come up with methods to circumvent that, it's not going to behave exactly as it would in physics. So throughout anything like a physics animation and a tutorial like this, we're going to have to make adjustments. But long story short, what I'm doing here is releasing each of the 16 marbles individually, so that I can make sure all 16s end up dropping through the hole, and then they come down. And this was part of me testing my switcher here to see if my switcher could handle this whole thing. So what we're going to do in this tutorial is learn how to make a few standard track designs, cover some theory about what works and what doesn't. So let's get into that part. Some theory. Alright, so in order to have a good kind of track design here, we have to consider some things right from the beginning. So here's some stuff that works for me and has worked for several marble runs I've created. So these are the critical settings if you ignore everything else, right? This here is critical. We're going to use a 7 centimeter radius marble ball. We're going to have 12 centimeters between the centers of our track, and our track is going to be created from splines, which we're going to give a thickness of 2 centimeters. To make sure the ball is nice and round, we're going to give it 32 segments so that we end up with a beautiful marble. Like I said, we're going to do 12 centimeters between the centers here for our track design. We're going to give it that 2 centimeter radius, and we're going to give it 24 sides. What does sides mean? If we're looking at this end view of the track, a 4-sided circle would look like that. A 24 will look almost perfectly round. So the more sides, the more round. And I think 12 for our track makes for a nice looking track. Occasionally we're going to need to touch on this interpolation section, which kind of has to do with if we look like we created a spline with 3 vertices, right? And this is the spline part of it between the vertices, right? The interpolation steps is how much it's going to break down each of that section. So if we had 4 steps, right, then we would get, the equivalent of this being broken into 4 each section between there. So occasionally we're going to have to adjust the steps on the spline to get the kind of curves and result we want. On the cross connectors, when we get to that point, which is when we are prettying up our marble run, initially we're just going to concentrate on track only and guards or marble diverters that kind of keep the marbles on the track. But when we do add cross supports and start making it all look pretty, it's going to be the same kind of spline setup we're going to use for our track. So imagine we have a cross member here and a cross member here holding those 2 track segments together. Well, that's going to be 1 centimeter in size. Color scheme. You have to think about this at the beginning, because you're going to make lots and lots of track segments, And you should be, once you've confirmed a working track segment, you should be assigning material IDs to each of the elements. So you need to decide on your color scheme. Something like this is what I'll go with, but initially we're just going to concentrate on these three, which is going to be a checker pattern for our marbles, black and white, so that we can see and test if our marbles are turning correctly. And bright yellow kind of color for the track and a blue color for the guards. This is where we're going to get, this is what we're going to get started from, and we'll make all our track segments from splines, converting them into edible polys. Alright, let me clear this stuff here. And let's talk about, we need to make things modular in size, right? So we need some sort of modularity to our design. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to use a couple of guide boxes, and they're either going to be a variation of 50 by 50 split into 5, right? So this isn't exact because I'm drawing it very fast, but I'm going to use a cube like that, and I'll do a 100 by 50 version of it. And each one of these is going to end up being 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And it's mainly that when we're making a modular track design, we need to have things being able to reasonably fit modularly together size-wise. And while we're occasionally going to break that rule, and then we will need to make a custom little track section for adjustment, but other than that, for most part, we're going to do some sort of consistent sizing. Now, when we do stuff like splines and we say that this is going to be a track drop kind of thing, right, and we're going to use Bezier curves and all that kind of thing, the goal here is to have each end of the track being vertical, right, so that when we connect two tracks together they line up perfectly. In other words, we can't have this on the end so that when we have two tracks they don't line up and the marble's going to fall in the hole here. So regardless of how we design a track section, we need to make sure we spend some time making sure these are perfectly vertical for aligning. Now there's two ways you can kind of think about track design. At some point the marbles have to continuously run downhill or they're not going to run, right? So the way I'm going to do it is I'm not going to have this angle that joins together and everything is angled. The way I'm going to handle my track design looking from the side is there's going to be a short horizontal section, then whatever angle down, and then followed by a short horizontal end. So we have a horizontal beginning and a horizontal end so that we can get this perfect alignment from each modular track section. So let's make our first drop. Alright, I said we were going to use guide boxes, so here's my setup. I got 4 50 by 50 by 50 cubes split into 5 segments so that each equivalent cube is a 10 by 10, which is the same as my grid setup. But this is going to be our three-dimensional guide system for making the various pieces of track. Let's make our first one right now. When we're making curves, we're going to do them from the top viewport. So left hand curves, right hand curves, whatever, will be created in the top viewport. When we're making straight sections, we're going to do them in the left viewport. So let's pick our left viewport and maximize it. For this section, we're just going to make 2 straight track segments. So I'm going to go into my layer manager from out here, and I really do not need the 2 top boxes for this, and so I'm not going to show them. So I'm going to turn on 2D snap, and I'm going to make sure it's set to vertex, and then we're going to go in and create a line. So for our first track, we're going to create a, hang on, get into my layer manager here and make sure this is visible and turned on. And for our first track, we're going to make a short low drop track straight, right? So I'm going to click here, click there, click here, click there, and that is going to be our first low slow drop. And so we're going to go into the layer manager and turn off our grid boxes for right now, and I'm going to zoom in here, and we're going to select this and go into modify and to our vertex mode, and we're going to select this, and we need them nice and curvy, so it's going to be a bezier, right? And this here we're also going to do a bezier, and for now we're going to even these bezier control handles, so we're going to reset the tangents, and we're going to do the same here and reset the tangents. Now we're ready to make some adjustments on making the track. So the goal here is, when we enable this in the viewport, and we said it was going to be 2 centimeters, so now we're setting the thickness to be 2 centimeters, and we also said it's going to be 24 sides. So that's the first step we're going to take. We're going to turn this off, and now we're going to try and adjust this a little bit, and we've got snap on, so we're going to undo that and turn off snaps, and we're going to make our manual adjustment until we think that this is ending up in a vertical manner, the end here, right? And we're going to do the same here, and we're just going to get a nice slopey curve. So when we turn this on, the goal here is zooming in on this should be straight up and down. In case you're not sure you're getting it straight up and down, just come in here and create a dummy rectangle, right? And move that over here somewhere until you get a guide line you can use for making sure this is straight up and down. So now when we go back into this vertex mode and we grab this, and I'm just going to turn it off because I don't think there's a bezier corner, so we can't rotate it, right? So let's click on this and turn it into a bezier corner. Now we can use our rotate tool and turn this back on so we can see, and now we can roughly rotate that until we think it's totally vertical, and it looks pretty good to me. It's close enough for our scenario. Alright, so this end is good. Now we come up to this end here, we can see that it's slanting in one direction. So if we come back in here into our rectangle and create another rectangle here, turn off that so we can see it as a rectangle, move it, and we got these 2 guide boxes. Now you go, well, do I really have to do this? No, you can try and eyeball it, and you can try and do whatever you want, right? But at the end of the day, the more accurate you are about creating your splines and the accuracy of your joints, the better your whole track system is going to look when it comes time to put tracks together. And it's too late once you've made so many track elements and then you find out they don't Lego together really nice. So here we have is our first little track section. Now when I turn off this enable in viewport, we can see that here are 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 vertices that are controlling this spline, and 2 guide boxes which had nothing to do with the track. I said earlier that we're going to have to come down here somewhere here and make adjustments to the number of steps. Now depending on how you want to handle this, steps is going to be the number of times it breaks each of these segments into. So if we turn on this enable in viewport and we can see the lines here, right? When we make adjustments here to this, you can see that right now it's just adjusting these outside parts because this is one straight segment from here. It's perfectly straight from this vertice to this vertice. So where I said that we're going, I'm going to do 12 for this little example. It's a very simple track segment, right? So what we have here is the beginning of our first track. So for us to be able to test this, And we don't want to finalize it until we know it's working and it is exactly what we want. So initially we want to leave it as a spline that we can come back and edit if we need to. Then we need to apply an edit poly modifier to it so that it can be seen by tyFlow, alright, and it can be part of physics collisions. Now we don't need to do this right now because we're in testing mode. We could do this when we finally convert the track to a poly, right? But we can go into element right now, and when we look at the way we set up our materials, alright, we can see that 1 is the marble, 2 is the track, and 3 are the guards, right? So we come down here, this is a track segment, so we're going to give it a material ID of 1, which is already set to. So we're all set here. This is now a functional single-sided track segment. We can delete our guide boxes right now for this purpose, and we switch back to all 4 views, and I'm just going to zoom in on all 4. Right, so now we need to duplicate this, and so we're going to pick our track element in the top viewport, and we're going to right click on it and go clone, and we don't care about the name of thing, and for now we're going to make it a copy, which makes it easier later. Then we're going to go up here and manually move this copy 12 centimeters offset from the first one, which we're going to do manually. Alright, so now we have an accurate double track that should work with our marble, and right now they're 2 individual elements. Let's do our first test in tyFlow and see if this works for us. Alright, so I've positioned my ball, remembering that the ball is 7 centimeters radius with 36 segments, and all I've done in tyFlow here is I've got a slow ball and a fast ball, which we will explain in a couple of minutes. But it's just the sphere that's been added. The physics shape is a sphere because that's the best fit for a circular marble. Haven't adjusted anything other than making sure that you turn off mass relative to property, turn that off, and we're either going to end up sticking with a mass override or 15 on 20 depending on how it goes throughout our testing. We're going to slow the speed by 4%. Just so the marbles, they run a bit fast if we don't slow them a little bit. So throughout the animation, we're just going to try to keep running the marbles at about 4% slower than what they do. And on the marble, we're going to put an material ID because maybe we want to change it later and have multicolored marbles or whatever. But on the marble, we will put a fixed ID, and we said the material ID for a marble was going to be number 1. So at this point, we haven't got any track in the track, but I've set up a event here that says track test, and we're going to pick our 2 tracks. Remember, at this point they are not joined because we still want to be able to edit the splines if we need to. And then we're going to give them a physics shape. I'm going to display the hole so you can see the hole, and it's not showing because tyFlow is not on, but all tracks parts are going to be mesh objects, which means they're going to end up having a perfect hole for whatever shape they're representing, and also they're going to suspend and do whatever. They're just going to suspend their inanimate objects, so to speak, as far as physics. So all track elements will be mesh. So let's switch tyFlow on for a minute, and we can see here that our hole is a perfect fit of the track. And we can see here, we'll turn off edge faces for a minute, and we can see our marble, and because of the checker pattern, we'll be able to check our first track section. So let's slide the time slider and see what happens. The ball falls in the track, and it seems to be rotating nicely, and I lifted the track a little bit off the ground. Initially when we first created it, it was touching the ground, but it looks like everything for this track segment looks like a functional track section. Let's duplicate this track so we can see what else we might want to do to make working with track modules or little sections easier to work with. Switch tyFlow back off for a minute. I got this set up so I can make it faster in tutorials, but really I'm just deselecting tyFlow layers and selecting poly layers when I'm switching here. Alright, so we're going to double the length of our track, just putting two of these end to end. So when we look in this left viewport and maximize it for a minute and zoom out, I'm going to grab these two and take them, easier to work with right this section, right this minute. I'm going to group them. And it doesn't matter what it's called, and then I'm going to clone it. And I'm going to make it an instance, because once I have a final track design, I want any of these short load dropping tracks. If somehow at some point we modify anything on them, we want to modify it on the other. And you can see right now we're going to end up going through the floor. This is the floor plane here, right? So let's lift this up a little bit higher, which means we're going to have to reposition our marble. And then we're going to try now to line this up perfectly with this. The first thing that might make life easier is if we reposition the pivot point. So we do the pivot and move it up here to the end somewhere, and it always want to be at the top of the track, because that's usually the way that you work. You work your way down as you're making your track, so that's not a bad position for lining things up perfectly here. Now we're going to bring that in right next to here, and the goal here is to really zoom in and get a nice alignment. Now you can see why it was important that we made these ends perfectly vertical, right? Because otherwise we're going to get gap, and you're eventually going to see them in your final animation. So that's why you want to have this reasonably accurate. So let's position this. Oops. Alright. And let's see about there. You can see here we're a little bit high. So let's just go down probably one more, maybe two more. Alright, so we've got the side view lined up. So if we go back out of here and go into our top viewport, this is our lower track section, and we're going to try and line that up pretty accurately here. Alright, so now we have two straight tracks that we just created almost lined up perfectly. Well, they are lined up perfectly. Now we go into tyFlow, and we're going to add those two. Well, it's still grouped, so I'm just going to remove that, and I'm going to ungroup it. What is going on here? Sorry about that. And now we'll pick this, and we pick that. And so now we have our 4 track parts joined, and now we have to realign our marble. But let's turn on tyFlow and see where our marble is, and I have to go into the layers menu here and where my balls are, and I have to turn that on, and we will position our marble roughly at the top of this new track, and something like that. And I think it's in, yep, it's in the center. So now if we look and see how everything is looking, I think we have a hole turned on. We'll turn that off so we can see the track better. And let's do our first test of 2 straight low slow tracks. So everything looks good for our low slow straight drop. So now we can finalize the track portion. We can turn these into a single poly, because we're happy with the way this is acting and the way the ball is rolling on these 2 track segments. There's our very first marble track segment working. Alright, so I'm going to go into tyFlow, and I'm going to delete all our track bits. And I'm going to turn off tyFlow for now, and I'm going to turn off tyFlow with my quick switcher. And for now, we are going to convert this into an editable poly, right? So group, and this was already ungrouped. So convert to editable poly. and then we're going to convert, well, we can do all 4 of them right now. Normally I would just do 1, and then we make it and duplicate it. Actually, that's what we will do. We just tested the track, and we're going to convert this to editable poly. So now we go into this first left hand part of the thing, go into element, and we're going to attach our second side. So now we have 2 tracks that are one editable poly with 2 different elements, and we'll zoom in on all the thing here. And remember, at the beginning we were planning and we said we were going to have a certain color scheme. Before we get too excited and create too many more track elements, we are going to assign the proper material ID, in which case the yellow track, orangey track, is material ID number 2. So let's go in here to elements, they're both selected, go down and make sure we've got material ID 2 set, and then that is good to go. And then what we can do right while we're at it is we can actually take our material editor and drag our material onto this. And the way we've got tyFlow set up right now, it's going to inherit the material. See, inherit from object, right? So we don't need to apply the material right now to tyFlow, but we will. But if there's no specific material ID operator in here on the tracks, it's going to inherit whatever material we applied to our polygons. So that makes it easy for us to visualize everything. So I'll be right back. I'm going to duplicate this track again like we had it before, and then we'll carry on and make our first curve. And we will talk about potential problems, real problems that we have to address in our design. Alright, we're back. I've fixed everything, so now we just have 2 sets of tracks. I've renamed them track, straight, low, short, so I know what they are later. So this is short number 1 and this is short number 2. And right now they're in my default layer, which is where I create everything. And we got our ball here. So now when we go into tyFlow, and I can just pick these 2 tracks now and add them, and that's the beginning of our very first track section. And again, when we turn tyFlow on, we're going to see that everything worked the same as it did before. So let's make our first curve. Remember, right now we're not making it pretty. Right now we're just concentrating what is cool to tyFlow and physics, which is track and a working marble, and figuring out how we're going to make tracks that work on a large scale with lots and lots of elements. Having said that, let's go into tyFlow for a minute, and I've made some minor adjustments to the standard tyFlow settings. Single frame is not going to work. You're probably going to need a quarter frame to have all this work properly. And the other setting that you may as well adjust is when you go in here to PhysX, and right now it's set to 8 substeps by default, but we're going to set ours to 12. Maybe we need to tweak that later, but right now they're the 2 changes that we're going to make in the standard main settings of tyFlow: quarter frame and 12 substeps. Let's get on to making the curve. Alright, so we're going to make our first curve. For that we're going to, I've turned off the 2 straight sections we already made, but we're going to need our guide boxes, and I'm only going to need the bottom left box because it's going to be a short, low 90-degree curve. So remember we said that we would create curves in the top viewport. So I'm going to hide our layer box, maximize that. We're going to go in here to spline creation mode, and we're going to turn on our 2.5D snap, and we're going to create the curve this way. So we will tweak this in the top viewport in a second. So remember, it's 2 centimeters thickness, 24 sides. Let's turn that off for a minute, and let's hide our guide box layer. We don't need it anymore, right? And now we can tweak the outer part of our curve. So we go into modify and we go into vertex mode, and we're going to turn off snap so it doesn't screw us up, and we're going to turn this into a Bezier corner. We're going to turn this into a Bezier. We're going to turn this into a Bezier and this into a Bezier corner. So now we can tweak our curve. Remember that we want these to be perfectly vertical so that when we connect two things together. So right now, let's kind of just tweak that until we get this roughly where it looks like it's going to be horizontal, and you can see it's not going to get there on its own. We turn this on to help visualize, and we can, because we made this a Bezier corner, we can rotate this a little bit until we see that is perfectly aligned. We need to do the same to the top now. That looks pretty good there. Maybe we don't want this quite as far away. Maybe we can bring this, it's actually stretching the Bezier, even though I didn't ask it to do that. And we just want it perfectly horizontal or vertical. Let's see, we can bring that up closer, something like that. Let's see how the corner looks. It doesn't look bad, but right now we've only got a flat. It's not dropping, right? So if we turn back our guide box for a minute, turn our guide box layer back on for a minute, and we just make it frozen, and we can take our two Beziers here and we can lift them up. We said low and slow, but let's go for 2 levels. So we're going to make it 20 centimeters roughly a drop, right? So we go in now and turn off our guide box layer, and we should see we have the beginnings of a dropping corner. Now this is when we need to go in here and go down here and see what this is set to right now. 12 is probably enough, but let's do 18 just in case. We'll see how it looks. Trouble is, it's putting a lot down here at the beginning, at the end, but that's not a big deal. It's more, what does it look like in the middle here? I think we have a fairly good sloping corner that's going to line up well. So now we need to, I mean, personally, I'd like to see this being a bit more of a corner, right? So let's go to vertex here and see what we can do. Let's tweak this a little bit. It's not quite going to work for us. This is one of those things you're just going to have to adjust until you like. See, I've created an ugly curve here I didn't want, so let me undo. I think what we need to do is stretch this out. If I can grab that handle, and it doesn't want to stretch that way, so we have to stretch it this way, which now means we have to move this sucker, alright, until we get a nicer sweeping curve. So I think that's a nicer sweeping curve, but there's a little tiny hump here that we have to address, probably by bringing it down a little bit here and then rotating this a little bit, and you can see the tweaking that's involved in making a perfect track. There, that's good, and this end is good. Alright, so now we come in here to the spline, and we're going to come to where it says outline here, and we're going to type 12, because remember it's 12 centimeters to centers. And yes, it makes a connected kind of setup, but that's alright. We'll go into the segment here and we delete this segment and we delete this segment, and now we have an offset inner and outer track, which looks pretty good. But let's verify it up close. This looks pretty good here. This looks pretty good. So we have our first kind of sloping downward corner. You can see it there. It's going to drop. That's not bad. one thing that we have not addressed yet is the potential for the ball wanting to fall off if there's enough speed, which means we have to design guards. But let's just stick with making our first 90-degree corner. We now need to turn this into an edible poly so that tyFlow can see it, and we might as well go in here and modify and move the pivot, and we're going to put it up near the top where we normally move and position everything, because we normally join at the top and work our way down, right? And as long as it's close there, that's not bad. Alright, so now if we go back in and to our layers here, and we turn on our tracks that we previously created, right, and I get rid of this, and now we try and align this track segment up with our previous track section. And let's see where we are here. Alright, so now you can see why moving the pivot mattered here, right? It's right there for me to grab. So now we want to line this up fairly accurately. And bring that right in there, bump it up a little bit. Maybe a little bit more up. That's really, one more. That's pretty good there. How does it look on this alignment? It looks pretty good. So if we go into tyFlow now and pick our curve, and then we turn tyFlow on and see what happens. And let's zoom out so we can actually see what happens. And everything looks good, but you can see that what I said might happen happened, and the ball spat off the end of the corner because it's not a banking corner. And I haven't had success making a banking corner. So first way we're going to try and address this issue is by putting a guard on corners. So we need an offset to this on the outside, right? And this is why it was good that we kept these as splines. So now when we go in here and select this spline, right, we can come down here and detach it. Alright, so now we get out of there, and now this is a spline. So now we need to create an offset again, right? So if we go in here and select the spline like we did before, now we can come down here and find the outline again, and this time we want it to go to the outside. And I know from playing around that we want an outline of -3, right? So you can see it's just to the outside. And now again we click the segment and we delete that segment and we delete that segment, and now we have our outer guard, which we're going to have to raise up a little bit, but it's a nice offset of the track. So now that we're happy with the curved track section for this part of it, we can actually turn this into an editable poly, right? And then we can come in here to element and we can attach this one here. Oops, they can see that they were still joined, so I'm going to undo that. And we're not going to attach right now. We're going to come out of here, we're going to come into here, and we're going to select this spline, and we're going to detach it. Alright, don't worry about what they're called for now, right? And then we can turn this into an editable poly, but we'll just go back here and attach. So now these two are part of a curve, and we can now call this low, slow, 90 curve, for lack of a better name. And now we need to raise this guard a little bit, right? So this is our guard, and I think my preferred setting is about, I think 3 centimeters in the Z. So if we go 3 on our type in, what happened there? It's just supposed to be, why did it attach that? I'm not sure how the guard got attached. We're just going to select this element here and we're going to detach it. I'm not sure what mistake I made there, but we will just detach it and get out of there again. And now we're going to raise this up 3 centimeters. And you can see I've raised it, right? I think that might be about right, but, and let's go back into our curve and re-add it. Alright, so now we element, let's, I don't know what everything's set to right now, but we're just going to go in there. All of them are set to material ID 1, and then, which is wrong, we want 2 for the tracks, and then on the guard we want 3, and if we get out of there and go into our material editor and apply that, we should see yellowy orange tracks and blue guards. So let's see how that affected our ball running off the track. So we go back into tyFlow, we have to check whether or not that track is actually part of it. It says line, remove, and tyFlow off, pick low slow curve, and let's see what happens when we do the time slider. tyFlow on, time slider. We can see that it's still trying to spit off the end. I think I'll probably raise this up a little bit, but this is actually a potential problem, period, right? Let's do 2 more. And let's close out of there. So now we've raised it a total of 5. And let's go tyFlow on again and see what happens. It's keeping it on there, but barely. It's coming off at the end. But now, this is something that I can't explain easily. As far as, I prefer not to have down pushes or down kind of guards on my corners. So you see most of the tracks I've done, I've just got the guard. I don't have anything higher to stop the ball from ejecting itself, right? Now, part of this reason has to do with speed. We're not controlling the kind of speed that's coming into the corner here. So if, for example, I came in here and moved this ball, right? So if we go into the layer menu, and I just turn on the ball so we can see it and move it. And let's say I go back to 0 for a minute and I move the ball, the marble, down here further, somewhere around there, and it starts around there. And now we can see I happen to put it right on the level part. So we're going to just move it over here, which is going to be enough to get it going. Alright, let's see how that looks. You can see that with a slower entry, right, with a slower speed entering into the corner, I can stop it from ejecting off the corner. So there's 2 things at play here that you have to consider. These are fairly steep, even though I call them low and slow. They're probably too steep for a low and slow. A low and slow probably should have been 10 high instead of 20. So you only have 2 options here. You either have to put a top bar that forces the marble back down in the corner until it's sitting in the corner and in effect slows it down or stops it from ejecting, or you have to control the speed of the marble coming into the corner. and that's only going to get shown by me by us doing various different marble designs. I mean, an easy solution for us right now would just be to put a second protective barrier on here to make sure the marble can't eject. But at some point you're going to have to address speed no matter what. The faster the marbles come to any of these, including your gadgets, your switches, your track switches, your droppers, at some point you're going to have to control what happens with a marble and the speed it comes into the next section. I'll do a little tweak here because you've seen enough about at least making track segments that you can play on your own until we get to part 2 of this video. Alright, so I stole this dropper from a future video, which we'll make in a couple of videos time, but instead of modifying and adding more guards to my corner, I'm going to control the speed at which the marble enters the corner. So the way I'm going to do that is it can enter as fast as it wants, but it's going to hit this 90-degree dropper that now drops the ball perfectly in place on our corner. It temporarily slows its movement to start again, and it takes the corner perfectly, not even trying to lift off it. So that is one possible solution, and I'll play it in real time here. Alright, you can see how we've controlled the speed of our marble, and this is something you're going to have to consider throughout a marble run series. You can also see, because I stole this from a future video, that I've actually put the mechanical or the prettiness parts to this drop down corner. It has the cross connectors that join the track, it has the connectors that hold the guard in place, and in the next video we will actually cover some of that, but I think this gets us started on making our very first marble run. We're going to make some cool gadgets and do some cool things, but I think this is where we'll leave this part of the video. Alright, that's the end of this first part. In the second part we'll start off by prettying up the track and finalizing each of those segments. We'll make a couple of more segments, and then we'll actually start to make cool gadgets that will redirect and all sorts of things with the balls. But I hope you found something useful in this part 1. Happy marble run making. Take it easy.